Alexander, Knife Sharpening and Laser Engraving. About 7 months ago, I reviewed the GoKaFix microscope from Banggood Industries because they had sent me one to review it. And I really loved it. Several of you purchased it. I think everybody's been having a really great experience with it. I've had great feedback from people. What I want to do today is give you some practical uses for both knife sharpening, and since I'm also a laser engraving shop, also laser engraving, because I do use the microscope for both. Little tips and tricks of things that I do that might be different than a typical digital microscope user that you might see who's, soldering electronic parts, looking at bugs or coins, stamp collections. What we're doing is kind of a bit different than everybody else out there. I will separate that into two different sections. For those who are only interested in why they might want a digital microscope for laser engraving, they can just jump right to that section. And those that are interested in knife sharpening and the uses for a digital microscope, they can start with that. I am going to start with the knife sharpening first, so we'll start there and then we'll go from there. The main reason that I want to show you some of this stuff is that we have a lot of new followers on the channel, a lot of new sharpeners, and people have been reaching out to me a lot that are brand new, that are wanting to start their sharpening business, that are getting into sharpening, or learning sharpening. One of the things for me that cut my learning curve drastically, I think it would have taken me even months more to get really good at sharpening, was the purchase of my first digital microscope. I believe in these things so much. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them in the shop. That's right. So they are all over my shop. It's just become a habit because it's just so useful. It will save you wasting time sometimes on something that, if you didn't have a digital microscope, that you may not know is going on with a particular knife, or just something you're missing. So I want to show you some really practical uses. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to start out first though by showing you how I use mine and a couple things that I do differently that you can do too. But there's a couple basic things that I do that I think everyone will find very useful, especially for the knife sharpeners out there. So let's get in close and I'll show you some of the basic things, and then I'll show you some of the things around the shop that I've done that are different, and we'll go from there. And then we'll get into some practical examples. I will put different knives under the scope and we'll look at them. I will sharpen some things. I will dull some things. I'll put dull ones under there. I'll put a brand new knife under the scope so we can take a look and see what that looks like, and just to give you an idea of what it can do for you. All right, so when I use my GoKaFix on the stand that it comes with, there's a couple things that I like to do. One of them is, you'll see here on the bottom, I have black painter's tape. For other things and different things that people are looking at under the microscope, the silver might be fine, but a lot of what we do as knife sharpeners is looking at things that are reflective, and sometimes they can be downright really mirrored. And I have always found that having a black background underneath the knife works much better. You just get too much reflection back up if it's the silver down here. And I've noticed this on pretty much every digital microscope out there. This is nothing to do with this particular microscope. I have done this with every digital microscope that I have that has a stand. I end up either, I've used paper, so you can use flat black paper. Tape works really well. This is frog tape in black. That works great. So that's the first thing that I do, because it gives you a better sight picture. The other thing I do, which I've shown before, is I made a little just slide, this is just 2 small pieces of wood, and I glued a magnet to mine. And this gives me the ability to put the knife under here, but then also nicely kind of slide it along, and I get a nice separation between the blade the background and everything else that's going on there. One of the interesting things with mirrored knives is how much they will knock out your apex. So if you can see here, it's pretty difficult to see that apex right now. I'm gonna brighten this up a little bit. And this is a Shun, so that we're also talking a knife with an extremely small bevel. And this is usually the only time you kind of run into this situation, but you can see it's really hard to see what's going on there. So here's the other thing that I typically like to do is I will change out this little plastic shroud, which I find is totally fine for regular knives and anything that's just not super mirrored. And it, in general, when we're talking kitchen knives, it's almost mostly Shuns that I run into that, because they're like one of the few really polished, mirror polished knives. What I put on here, this is a diffusion shroud, which helps it diffuse the light, which for some reason is very helpful with mirrored knives. And now do you see how much better we can see that apex of that knife and the bevel? We couldn't even see it before. It was just blown out from all the excessive reflection. This little shroud is really great. You can leave it on all the time. You can take it off. You can put it on just when you need it. And I'll show you that it's not really an issue with knives that are not mirrored. So here I have a Benchmade, and you can see it's acid washed finish. And I'll show you what this looks like. Let's get that focused, and there you go. All right, so there's a good picture. So you can see it looks great, right? You can see the chips in here. Look at that. We are looking right at that apex, and chip, big chip. This is a buddy of mine's that needs sharpening that he dropped off, and he uses a lot. He does a lot of farming, and he is hard on his knives. And you can just see like all the stuff. We're all the way down to the tip there. Let's focus that. You can see how beautiful that picture is. Let me show you the difference. Again, we'll jump back to just the regular shroud. I only like microscopes that have shrouds. So you see how we can see this beautifully now? This looks great, right? And you can see how different that looks with the other shroud. But on that Shun, it was just too much reflection. But you can see it really didn't matter for this Benchmade. That looks really good. And you can see placement has a lot to do with it too. So you want to make sure you're in your best lighting area. But there we go. We can go right down, slide right down that apex and see what's going on there. So generally, I will usually use this shroud on most microscopes until I got this GokaFix. And on mine, I actually tend a lot of times to use the diffuser because I really like the picture that you get with the diffuser. There is one difference, and there is one nice thing about using the plastic shroud that we just had on, and that is the microscope is totally capable of focusing all the way down to touching. I can touch a blade to this plastic part and it can still focus on it. It will not do that with the diffuser. But you can see how beautiful, I mean, that picture with the diffuser is just awesome. It just looks so good. And you can really see things really well. Here's the difference. If I try to I'm gonna bring this all the way down to where it's touching, it's just not capable of focusing there. So it's already out of its minimal focus range. So that's the downside of the diffusers. You're not gonna be able to touch the knife up against it and get it in focus. When I use the diffuser, it's almost always in this particular setup with the knife on the original microscope stand. But you can see why that looks so good. I mean, it really gives you a nice picture. And sometimes it's a matter of just adjusting your light. And that's why in other videos of mine, you'll see where I always talk about having adjustable LEDs is hugely important. I returned several microscopes early on that didn't have adjustable LEDs because they were just doing me no good, because all I saw was a blown out picture and I couldn't see anything. So let's throw another one under there. Here is the, here's one of my little Odenwolf knives. There you go. And this thing's in really good shape, still very, very sharp. And you can see how great that looks. No chips. That blade's looking really, really good. All the way down to the tip. So that gives you just a little example of what the difference is between the little plastic shroud and diffused light, looking at knife blade apexes and bevels, keeping in mind that you can do it with both, and it's really only an issue, like I said, when we are dealing with a highly mirrored knife. Okay, so what I have here, this is a brand spanking new knife. This has never been used to cut. It is literally right out of the box, brand new. And there you can kind of get a feel for what a brand new blade. Look how perfectly straight that apex is. It looks really good. This knife's about a $65 knife. It's a Santoku. It's from China. Pretty nice knife. I'll show you later. But it's you know, it's not a Shun. It's not a Miyabi. It's not that high of a quality. But it actually has a HRC of 60, which is great. A Japanese style knife. You will see a lot of these Chinese knives that are, they almost present them like they're Japanese knives. This one's at least legit. They do tell you that it's made in China. Some will literally even try and hide that. But you can see factory edge. That looks great, right? I mean, it looks really, really good. All the way, let's get down to the tip here. The knife edge there was angling up, so I actually knocked it out of focus a little there. There we go. And sometimes the microscope needs a second or so for just the lighting to adjust. And that's the plastic protector. We just hit the plastic protector because it hasn't even been taken off of this knife yet. Now let's take a look at that Shun again. That is very dull. If I pushed really hard, it would cut me, but it is, for a Shun, this is extremely dull. There we go. Now we can see it pretty good. And that's the interesting thing. If you haven't seen or worked on a Shun yet, if you're new to knife sharpening, their bevel is super tiny. You can barely see it. Like, that's under the microscope, and this is not uncommon on these. But you can see we got chips. It even looks rolled to me in some spots. A whole lot of chips. Not sure what's going on here, but yeah, this is all chewed up here. You know, it definitely needs to be sharpened. Lots and lots of chips. Let's adjust the focus a little. There we go. So this is just to show you also the importance of that light and adjusting your LED, and that going darker and darker will be a big help to you at times. Yeah, we got chips the entire length of this blade. I'm almost at the tip. There was a big chip there. And same thing here. We're getting a little, we should be right there. Wow, and look, we're actually missing, that's the tip. That's the tip of this knife. It's actually missing the tip. So that tip broke off. And yeah, you can see it. So you can see it. It's, I'll show you the front of this blade here. Let me zoom in. See? So we can see, But you guys see how you got to look really close sometimes. So that needs that spine grind down a little bit to fix that tip. But under the microscope, right, you couldn't miss that. It looks like a giant shark bite came off that. There's no missing that. It's a great diagnostic tool, and it's going to teach you a lot about sharpening and how things look after you start to sharpen them. And it's also neat to see. Now let me show you this close up. Okay, so you see how small that bevel is? I mean, it's super tiny. It's one of the smallest that you see out there. Sometimes is on Schuns and some Miyabis, but this is even smaller than on, on a lot of their different models. That is a super small bevel. Let's talk about things like the Sharpie trick. How much are you actually gonna see? What happens sometimes is you will see under the microscope a tiny hint of black. But if you see with your naked eye, it will look like you've removed it all from here. And the knife's just not getting sharp. And you're like, why isn't it getting sharp? But then you put it on the scope and you see that little tiny bit of black and you go, I still haven't apexed this knife. All right, so there's a couple good looks at a few different knives, how the microscope can be very useful to you diagnosing what's going on with any particular blade. Here's another great way to set up your microscope and use it. And I'm going to show you in this video 2 ways that you can do this. This is from another company that sells microscopes. They have these microscope holders, which you can see is clamping it around the frame. And you can see doesn't fit it perfectly. And the funny thing is, the company that makes this, the one microscope that they say that it fits, doesn't fit perfectly on there either. Just one of those weird things. But I love having the digital microscope right next to where I'm sharpening so I can just check things really quick. So I'm getting ready to do 4 Schun steak knives. I always pretty much like to do 2 reprofiling strokes no matter what I see, and especially on Japanese knives. So if we look at this knife, what do we say? It looks really good, right? It looks like you might get away with not doing, but there, oh, look, we got a dent there. Now let's just keep checking this edge all the way down. And I'll show you, oh, look at here. Chip, chip, chip. Couple minor chips. We're getting up closer towards the tip. Oh, big chip. Look at that. Another chip. And we're coming towards the very tip here. And it's a little rolled up there at the front. But you can see that if we had just checked one little spot, we might have been like, oh, hey, I can start at 600 and this will be fine. But I guarantee you that chip we saw that was right about down here would not have come out. And I'm sure that's probably a chip you would feel. And I'm just going to do a quick little cut here, and I'll let you know if I can feel it. You can definitely see the shoe needs some sharpening. It's not even cutting well. And I can tell it's rolled too. So if you turn the knife, you'll see a reflection. If you get a bright reflection up there in areas, that's usually where it's rolled, where that apex has just rolled over. Yeah, there's that chip. I can feel it. It's a good sized chip. Let's do what I would do to get this knife back into shape on a 1x30. And you can, as I'm saying, it's great to have lots of options, but some of you out there are just starting and the only thing you might have is one 1x30. So I'm going to do the whole thing on the toolker here. Feeling for a burr? I have a burr. Now, I'm going to quickly check to be sure I've gotten all the chips out of the knife. You can see we got that, very rough looking 120 grit Crubatron look. And I think that was our chip there. I'm looking for any other major chips. And there's one there still. So I think this would benefit from a couple more strokes. So I'm going to do 2 more. I wouldn't be checking this as much as I am. This is more for you guys so you can see. See how much nicer that looks? Oh yeah, that looks much better. See, we're nice, symmetrical, we're more straight. Even though it's still rough, it just in general is a much better looking bevel now. And now we can go on to our A30 and really have this knife back in shape. You can save yourself a lot of work by checking with a digital microscope. So I'm going to swap this out. I'm going to grab my A30 belt, and now you'll see this start to look like a beautiful knife. And let's just take a quick look under the scope so you can see what to expect. And look how much, do you guys see how beautiful that is? Look at that. Look how nice that bevel looks now. And you can see how it's getting really nice and straight and symmetrical. You can see here, there's a little tiny little bit of rough there that still needs to come up. But keep in mind too, we have not even honed this yet. We're working on one machine today. It was, and normally I use multiple, but we wanted to show that you can do it with just one. So now's our A16. In my process, it's Crubatron, remove the imperfections, chips. A30's doing the majority of the work of making that look nice, and you can see how great that looked. And then when I get to the A16, I'm only doing usually about 2 or 3 strokes. It's not a lot at this level. And some people stop at A30. I like to go all the way to the A16. But it doesn't have to be for a ton of work. On this one, I'm going to do 3. And I'll just give you a quick look again so you can see. And you can just see it's just even more refined, even finer. And now we got that beautiful straight apex. It's not chewed up anymore. We got no chips. And you can wipe the blade if you want to really see a perfect sight picture every time. Because you will get stuff on there. It's usually just junk that's on there. It's not a bad idea to wipe it on a rag. So now I am going to do the leather belt, since I'm going to show you, yes, you can do it all on one machine. And now I have to switch directions because we're using our leather. So now this belt's going to start going away from me. You should feel this. Even though it felt sharp before, after you hone, now it should feel razor sharp. And this feels like a razor to me now. It doesn't necessarily take a ton of honing. It can be just a little bit. Now I'm going to wipe this with a rag before we put it under the scope because I want it to be nice and clean for you so you can see now that we've honed. And the leather wheel will leave a lot of little artifacts. Little junk from the leather that will just stick to the knife. We wiped it. It's nice and clean. And look at that. Beautiful, right? Looks a lot like that brand new knife I showed you in the beginning. Another interesting angle to look at a knife under the microscope is the very top and very peak of your apex. So let's take a look at a couple different knives. So I just sharpened my buddy's Benchmade that he's coming over later to pick up tonight. And I want to show you the top down view. Now I only did this up to 400 grit. He likes like a toothy grind. He uses this to cut lots of things. I mentioned, I think before, he does a lot of farming work. And I want to show you what this looks like under the scope. And this one's a little bit harder to balance nice and straight because any little bit of movement, there we go. So hopefully you guys can see that. So you see how nice that looks? And you do see a little teeny tiny bit of like a wire there, but trust me, this knife is sharp, and some of that is probably stuff that was left behind from honing. In fact, let's give it a wipe. I don't even remember if I wiped it down. I don't think I did. So that could be from my paper cut test. Let's take another quick look here. Come up a little bit. Yeah, there you go. There's a good look at it. So we can see it's pretty clean. So you can see where our two bevels meet into that apex. We have very little reflection there. And I'm going to show you how well this is cutting, even at a 400 grit, because I've said many times, sharp isn't got to do with the grit, right? That baby is push cutting just beautifully at 400 grit and slice cutting like a champion. Just wanted to show you what that looks like. All right, so now here's one of my chefs that comes in regularly. This has not been sharpened yet. And let's take a look at this straight up, right at that apex, and see what we see. So what's the first thing that kind of jumps out at you, right? Look at the reflection. I'll try and hold that steady. One too many cups of coffee today. So what do we see? A huge reflection, right? Which is a very good indicator that this blade is rolled, that our apex has rolled over to one side or the other. So anytime you see that big reflection, and this is where, a microscope's a good idea too, you know that you either have too much burr there, you could have a wire burr up top there. It shouldn't reflect like that. I'm going to show you the Benchmade again. And keep in mind, this is at a 400 grit. So here's that Benchmade. All right. You guys see the big difference? See no reflection? Just a little teeny tiny bit where the two bevels meet, but we're not getting that big blown out, ugly, bright light shining back in, which shows us that this knife has been honed really well. If you want your microscope on an arm like you've seen in my shop, this is very simple to do. You don't have to spend a lot of money. All you need to get is a simple microphone stand. They have microphone stands everywhere from about $17 all the way up to $60 with all kinds of different options in them. But I'm going to show you how easy this is to do. So what you do is simply take the whole stem unit off of your microscope, off of your desktop one, and you can use this if you want to. There are microphone stands that you can drop this right into if you want to do it that way. So you can look for a microphone stand where you can fit this right into it. But I actually have found what works really well is to just take the stem and use the back part of this actual microphone stand and put the stem into it. So what I like to do is I loosen this and I just drop this down because it gives me another range of ways to connect this. And then this is the hardest part, is just getting it on here, but it's really not too difficult because it actually is made to clamp around something. So what I do is I just adjust these, and then I squeeze my stem right onto there. And it's funny, but it even has, these have actually little bends and slots in them, and they fit really well once you get it on there. So I'll show you. There we go. You just have to loosen it enough so that you can kind of squeeze this into place. This microphone stand actually has two little like slot areas. So I can then put this kind of right here in the middle is good. And now I'm going to just tighten this down where my microscope's tabletop stands stem. And you can see now that's grabbed that really well. And I can even use this for some minor adjustments if I want. And then that gives me the ability to use this microscope on a stand. And I love this, as you've seen probably many times in many of my videos. It just gives you a really quick platform where you can just come up, and this is where I like to use the plastic. So this is not a great setup if you're going to use the shroud for the mirrored knives, because trying to get it in focus is going to be difficult. But when you have the plastic on here, because it doesn't move and it has the ability to focus touching, I can come and just touch that knife right up to that plastic, and you can see, I can see things perfectly. And once that thing's focused well, I usually don't have to even retouch it. I can grab just about any knife and I can just come over here and I can go real quickly right up here, take a look, see how things look, start sliding down there. And this, I have found, is one of the fastest ways to work with a digital microscope in your knife shop if you want to just add a simple microphone stand to the microscope. Here's the best news of all. Banggood Industries, the makers of the GokaFix microscope, sent me a code for the largest discount on this microscope that they've ever given. It's even bigger than Black Friday, where they gave 20% off. They're going to give my followers 40% off. This is a great time to pick up your first digital microscope, or maybe you want to add a second. As I told you, my shop, I have 5 of them around here. Maybe you want to have one set up all the time if you already have a digital microscope. Maybe you want to have one set up with the diffusion shroud on it for those times when you have mirrored knives to look at and not have to change things around. That's what I do. I have one that's set up over here. It always has a shroud on it. And that way, when I have a mirrored knife, I just go over there and take a look at that, and I don't have to make any changes to my ones that are on stands. I do not know how long they're going to honor the discount code, so I wouldn't wait too long. There were some people last time that missed out on the sale because they waited too long. Have a great day, everyone, and I hope this helps you out. All right, and the last part is for my laser engravers out there. One of the things you have to do when you get into laser engraving is a lot of testing. So we do lots of little test material runs on things, on wood, on metal, on plastics, and we get lots of different results that we have to analyze. And sometimes certain things can be kind of difficult to tell, hey, which one of these looks better? Sometimes they start getting really, really close. And the nice thing about having the digital microscope is it does give you the ability to really examine at an incredibly magnified level those results and see if you're seeing one that looks better. Does it have better coverage? Are the lines closer together? Can you read it better? Is it the color that you're looking for? Is it the shade that you're looking for? Because the lasers use multiple different settings. So sometimes we're changing frequencies on the fiber laser, which can give me different colors. But also I'm using a thing called lines per centimeter. And the interesting thing is that the lines per centimeter, the highest number isn't always your best results on certain materials, which, you would think if you're dealing in photography or TVs, like if you think of it as like resolution, you would think it's better, but it's not necessarily better. And it can also be a very big consumer of your laser engraving time. If you can get really good results that look great at a lower resolution or lines per centimeter, that can be helpful too as you look at these different things under the microscope to see, like you can see on this one right here, it's kind of a light. Then we get over here, it's a little darker engraving, and then even darker. And we can kind of be like, okay, we know it's these couple here, and then I can kind of look at it and be like, is one far better than the other? And it's just a great evaluation tool for evaluating the quality of certain engravings. I also like that you can kind of back this up a good bit. So here I can get two of them, next to each other, and then I can compare. So let's say my eye here says, oh, these two look like the best, or maybe these two. I can bring my microscope up, and then I can kind of look at those even closer under the microscope. And I have, and this is where the additional lighting can come in helpful. When we talked about how this has fill lighting that you can see here, you can adjust these little fill lights, and they will help you really examine the quality of something that you might want to try and get the absolute very best setting. Like this looks really nice to me as I'm looking for like a black engraving, and even the one next to it. And why this is important is it's also time saving. If you can get great results or the same results at a faster speed, that can speed things up in your laser engraving shop. Whenever I do one of these test grids, it's giving me power across the bottom, but the speed across the top. So if I can get the same result at a higher speed, then I can be more productive, and that engraving is not going to take me as long. It's just a great way to really evaluate the quality of your engravings.